Welcome back to another sci-fi episode where psychology and finances collide. We're going to continue to examine how we think, feel, and behave with money as it pertains to financial intimacy. In the last episode, which if you haven't heard that one, make sure you go back and listen because I provide some definitions on what intimacy is. And shocker, you can be financially intimate with your children as well, not just your spouse. And it is necessary. But we have to move away from what we think normally intimacy means. Most people's minds are going to go to physical intimacy, but there are several other forms of intimacy: financial intimacy, spiritual intimacy, emotional intimacy, and others. So this is just one piece of that. So I did talk a little bit about, in the first episode, the couples and money study that is driven by Fidelity. And this is their 8th study, the 2024 study. And that was since its inception in 2007 when they first published. And it just really knocked me off my feet when I looked at this study, because not only are they giving some real stats here, and these are actual stats from couples who are still together. So 1,794 couples, which makes 3,588 individuals, and they're 18 years and older. And yes, these days you still can get married at 18. I think when I was going through this, I didn't really know what to expect. And as I went through the study, like I do with every study, I tend to geek out a little bit with percentages and looking at the research design, if they publish it, and asking some different questions. What they found was what the couples were expecting versus what their reality was. And you might ask, well, Olivia, how do you figure that out? How can a couple complete a survey or a poll and then kind of read into what they're really thinking? Well, it's about behaviors. They took stats on what their expectations about money are, but then they also had another pool of stats that pulled together what their actual reality was. So let me just jump right in and give you the first stat. They found that nearly 9 in 10 couples, which is 90%, say they communicate well. Yet, the reality is more than 1 in 4 partners, which is 25%, resent being left out of financial decisions. So even though the whole study found, 90% are engaging in what we call the halo effect, I'm going to mark that, yes, my spouse and I communicate well about finances because I don't want anyone thinking negatively of me. Yet, through their design, they were able to sneak in some questions that would truly get at the heart of the issue and found, 25% or 1 in 4 resented being left out of financial decisions. So it just goes to show that the math did not match up. So there's obviously a communication issue, and that's a big duh, right? For the folks that are listening, you know that not everybody, 90% of people saying that they communicate well, yeah, we know that's not true. But let's talk about the other side of the coin here that is greatly impacting that 90%, is their perception of what communicating well looks like. Now, my definition of what communicating well could be completely different than what your definition is of communicating well. For you and your spouse, it might be like, hey, we're doing well and we're communicating well if we argue about money. Hey, that means we're at least talking about it. But that wouldn't be my definition of communicating well, but to each his own. So I thought that was a really good one to start off. And here's another one. Expectation versus reality. Most partners expect to retire around age 63. Yet, nearly half of respondents anticipating working part-time post-retirement. So it's almost as if these couples were undercutting each other, and not intentionally, but they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to retire at age 63." But then half of them were saying, "Oh, but I'm going to work part-time still." But imagine how all of the respondents, when they say, "Yeah, I expect to retire around 63," if their spouse doesn't know what their true definition of retirement is, imagine what kind of shocker that will be. Because maybe they were thinking, "Oh, I thought you knew that I would still work part-time." Not so true. So that could create some extra strife down the road if these things aren't communicated at this time. Here's another one. 6 in 10 couples, 60%, share the same vision for retirement. I think that's pretty impressive. Yet, more than half do not agree on how much money they need to have saved in order to retire. Now, here's what I want to show here. This is where my husband and I have our biggest source of tension. And it's not even a bad thing. It's actually good that we're talking about it and we're knowing what is absolute truth and what we need for the both of us to be happy with when we actually get to pull the lever or get out of that exit from work when we want to. I want you to know that just because you don't agree on how much money you need to have saved in order to retire doesn't mean that you aren't communicating well. And it doesn't mean that you can't share the same vision for retirement. You can have two beautiful things co-occurring with two negative things and still be okay. So this isn't about reaching 100% of total agreement. That will never exist between two people. That is, especially when it comes to money. I mean, you both have, again, different temperaments, different backgrounds, different experiences, different goals, different desires, different wants, and that's okay. So my husband and I, this is like I said, this is our greatest tension because he is more of an apple pie and I'm more of a pecan pie. And if you don't understand what that is, go back and listen to part 1 of this episode. He tends to be more anxious about the future than I am. And that doesn't mean he's wrong. It doesn't mean I'm wrong. It just means, again, that we're just different and we bring different ingredients to the table when it comes to money management, retirement planning, etc. So his idea of what's going to be enough, because he's a defender and a protector of our resources, is going to be very different than me because I am more of a celebrator. That's how I want you to kind of look at this as well. So here's another one. The top financial concern for partners is saving enough money for retirement. Yet, 55% of partners say they have no idea how much should be saved by the time they retire to maintain their current lifestyle. And what I love about this statistic that was derived from Fidelity's research, it matches what Western Southern Financial found in their survey when they stated that 54% waited until after marriage to even talk about retirement. So the 55% and 54% kind of coincide. I thought that was an interesting tidbit of information. All right. And if you want to understand that, listen to part 1 of this episode. So another thing that Fidelity found is that many couples still have one partner take the financial lead. And there's nothing wrong with this as long as you both are finding that instead of engaging in your burnout skills, you're actually engaging in your motivational skills. I'll state that in just a moment. So those who say they are the primary decision maker for day-to-day finances, and listen, I know you're waiting for it, 29% are men and 21% women. I thought it would be a lot more men, and I hope I don't sound chauvinistic or anything like that, but just based on what I see, what I hear, what kind of clientele that come in, and that's no judgment whatsoever, but I found that fascinating because it goes to validate that there are many women, because 29% is not that far off from 21%. 29% of men, 21% of women who are where there's one partner that takes the financial lead. So 21% of one partner is a woman and 29% of one partner being men. That means the other 50% felt like they were both doing it together and not one specific person taking the lead. Again, I want to remind you that one person taking the lead doesn't mean that that is a controlling person or that there's something wrong with how you're managing your finances. It might be that 29% of those men and 21% of those women enjoy that. But again, we want to get back to understanding, are we at least engaging in our motivational skills rather than our burnout skills? And just to give you the cliff notes on season 2, episode 10, where I talk about delegating financial burnout, that's where folks who might be taking the lead are feeling burned out of taking the lead. And maybe they would rather do something else within the finances. Maybe instead of managing the day-to-day budget or monthly budget, they would rather engage in the long-term investments and things of that nature. So that would be a good episode for you to follow up on in regards to how spouses are working together and how you could actually improve how you're working together by targeting your motivational skills. And then they have another stat here. Those who say they are the primary decision maker for the retirement investment planning, here's where there's a big difference. 31% are men and 16% are women. That one kind of like followed my train of thought in my mind of what that might look like. And I think it's because a lot of men have gotten some level of investment education. And so women have that same accessibility, but may not have known it. Or it could be also the age group in which this study was done. Now, this is from 18-year-olds all the way up through the lifespan. So that could also be causing that disparity as well. But please, ladies and men alike, please know that there is free financial investment education for you at finra.org. It is a great place to go and see where you can find information regarding investing and what to look out for, as well as to do a broker check to make sure that your broker doesn't have any specific actions against him or her, and also to see if anyone has any other filings against them. So that's a great thing to know. Now, here's another thing about couples. Less men are worried about their finances. Roughly 19%, should their spouse pass first. And I'm going to tell you why in just a moment. So let's first talk about retirement dreams. Partners have grand visions, this is what Fidelity said, of retirement filled with 77% wanting to relax at home, 77% spending time with family and friends, and these numbers are going to overlap because they probably had a drop down or several to choose from. 63% said engaging in hobbies, and 63% also said lots of travel. Despite these grand visions for retirement, nearly half, or 48%, expect to continue working part-time like we discussed earlier. And 1 in 5, also as we discussed earlier, believe they won't ever be able to afford to fully retire because they don't know what their numbers need to be. That is quite sad for me. It's great to dream and it's great to put a financial goal together, but if we don't have the belief that we would finally meet it or be able to engage in that type of future lifestyle, what's the point in planning? Have those conversations with your spouse. This is what financial intimacy is all about, where you dare to dream with each other. And that's what makes financial intimacy separate from an everyday conversation. You're not going to go have a financially intimate conversation with your coworker, or at least let's not hope that you are, because that could probably lead to other things, which we don't want that to happen. But becoming financially intimate with your spouse means that you are sharing those dreams that you have about the future. Now you're pulling from emotional intimacy and mental or intellectual intimacy and putting ideas together, hopefully putting them on paper and seeing where this will take you. So here are the stats. 38% of men are concerned about making sure their partner is financially set in the event that they were to pass away, versus 22% of women who worry about that. 30% of women worry about not being financially prepared in the event that their partner passes away, versus 19% of men who worry about this. So let me go back to what I was first talking about. So what this states is that less men are worried about their finances, 19%, should their spouse pass first, because most men at 38% are already thinking about estate planning and following through with estate planning. And more women are worried about their finances, like we said, 30%, should their spouse pass first, because less women at 22% are thinking about estate planning. This really illuminates for us that if we were to engage in the practice of estate planning, sure, if you don't have access to a free attorney at Redstone Arsenal, if you are a retired military member or an active duty member or family member, yeah, it might cost you a little bit. You might have to drop a little coin to get some estate planning. But as our attorney, Emily Baggett, who is on the podcast and different episodes, shares with you, it doesn't have to be that scary and it doesn't have to be that expensive. So really start educating yourself on what estate planning really is, what is probatable, and what is not probatable. So probatable assets versus non-probatable assets. And a lot of times your designation of beneficiary is what's going to do the talking for you anyway, because it will always trump a will. So that's just a quick and easy explanation of estate planning, but it is oversimplified. So make sure that you are researching that. Now, here is where most couples are locking horns, and where they tend to agree to disagree. And as Fidelity states, they have mismatched financial perspectives. But hey, we already knew that. We already talked about that. And so here's what they said. They said, we asked both members of the same couple to share their thoughts on a number of financial topics and then compared their answers. As it turns out, they may not be as aligned as they thought. So when it comes to money talks or talking about money, 2 in 5 couples are not aligned on how often they discuss their finances. And as we've already discussed, a lot of that has to do with perception or perspective. So again, what might be communicating well for you is going to be different than what I believe is communicating well. Or what one couple says, hey, the amount of time that we spend talking about our finances, for one, it may be adequate, and for another, that same amount of time may be inadequate. So that is not a shocker for me there. So again, 2 in 5 couples are not aligned on how often they discuss their finances. Another one on retirement, 7 in 10 couples share the same vision for retirement, yet more than half do not agree on how much money they need to have in order to save, or in order to have saved in order to retire. And we've already talked about that one. Now, here's a big one. I want to spend a little time on this one. And this is about investing. 1 in 4 partners think they're willing to take more risks in investing, when in reality, their significant other does not agree. So this comes down to knowing your risk tolerance and knowing your spouse's risk tolerance as well. Now, you can Google risk tolerance assessment or investment philosophy assessment, and many times it'll take you to a financial group. And they're fun to take, and a lot of times they do give you some good insights into what your risk tolerance might be. Are you very conservative, moderate, or more of a risk taker when it comes to investing? And the same can be said of investment philosophy. What's your philosophy when it comes to investing? What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? It's important to know yours just as much as it is to know your spouse's risk tolerance, because you could be doing what you think is best and sharing with your spouse, oh yeah, I moved another $5,000 into this investment because it's doing well over here, and I knew it would because it's more of a higher risk. And then you lose them as soon as you say higher risk, and now they become overly anxious and sick to their stomach, but then they put on a face that, oh yeah, all things are fine. You just keep doing what you're doing. But then internally, they're not fine. So if that's you, you need to speak up. And maybe it's because you're not aware of what that risk really means and how you're willing to tolerate that risk, if anything. And another thing on that, there's kind of a new trend that I've seen in money or couples dynamics when it comes to money, is a lot of people where one spouse, or couples where one spouse is engaging in day trading, which makes the other spouse feel extremely uncomfortable. Now, that's one thing when it's just a difference of risk tolerance or investment philosophy. But then it's a whole other animal when this person is dipping from your basic needs money to engage in day trading. That is now considered gambling behavior or addictive behavior. So this is where you and your spouse, when you're having these financially intimate conversations, hey, how are you investing? What pots of money are you investing, and how is that impacting us as a couple? How is it impacting me as an individual, or you as an individual? Those are some things that you can discuss from that platform. And here's another thing they found when it comes to savings. 1 in 3 couples do not agree on what their next big savings goal should be. Well, let me help you out. So, especially if you are a federal employee or an active duty service member or family member, the government shutdown came to a close in November of 2025, but we are only funded through January 30th of 2026. So I'm hoping that one of the savings goals, especially if you're tied to the government and you depend on them for your pay, is perhaps having that savings goal for another possible shutdown. But that's just one thing. But again, we're talking about financial intimacy. We're talking about what are some ways to improve how you choose to talk about money and engage with money from different perspectives. So my encouragement to you is sit down, have a conversation about what your savings goals coming up are. If it's to go see family, don't be afraid to say it out loud. If it's to dabble in cryptocurrency, don't be afraid to say it out loud. Talk about it, reveal those things. And I like to remind folks that when we first started dating and the person that we ultimately ended up marrying, or the person that you are committed to at this point in time that you hope to marry in the future, a lot of times in that beginning of the relationship dynamic, we are on our best behavior because we would want this person to eventually ask us to marry him or her, or vice versa. You would want this person to remain married to you, right? So we have that initial best behavior parts of ourselves. And then we get married. And then for some of us, we start to pool our money together, and now we have a dual income, and now we have a little more money to play with, and we're moving away from my money to our money. And let me go ahead and validate that is a developmental period, a developmental stage that can take months, if not years, to get to that habit of thinking of it as our money and not just my money or your money. So this is what's going to help you increase your financial intimacy. Here's some stats that I'll leave you with from Fidelity before we complete the remainder of this discussion. So here they are. Fidelity asked these couples, what keeps you up at night? And here were the top concerns amongst partners. But I want to preface this before I give you the numbers that Gen Z is going to have a slightly different number. So I'll read the total number that is different, because what they're measuring, they measured baby boomers, they measured millennials, Gen Z. Oh, I skipped one, but they had 4 different groups. So they had the baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. I think I was getting it right. I just second guessed myself. Out of them, Gen Z was different. So let's talk first about all the other 3 generations, and then we'll go into what Gen Z had to say. The top concerns amongst partners and what kept them up at night, 54% said that they feared that they wouldn't have enough money saved for retirement. Whereas Gen Z's top concern and what kept them up at night is making enough income to live the lifestyle they've always dreamed of. And this is different for Gen Z because they are in a different developmental stage. This is the youngest group, and they're now either transitioning from high school to college or from college to young adulthood. So yeah, that tends to match their developmental stage. Is like, I just want to know I have enough money. 60%, what keeps them up at night? Gen Z, making sure I have enough cash to live the lifestyle that I've always wanted, versus 54% who just want to make sure they have enough for retirement, which is developmentally appropriate for the other generations that we discussed. All right, here's another one. 51% of 3 generations were concerned about paying for healthcare costs in retirement. And Gen Z, they said, hey, 57% just having enough money to buy a home. And let me talk about that for a second. I heard a new stat just on the news this morning. The new average age of first-time homeowners, it's now 40 years old. Now, I don't know how they came across that stat. Is it average, or are we looking at a different stat here? I'm not sure, but I'm kind of worried that we have folks thinking that a home or the purchase of a home is what or is an indicator of financial success. I think we need to change that language. I think we need to have more conversations about why owning a home is not the rubric for financial success. So you have Gen Z who's worried that, oh gosh, I'm not going to have enough money to buy a home, and they're graduating high school and going into college or just finishing college. I'm sad that that's their top concern, because you can be financially successful and have an apartment and do just fine with that, and actually do better in that developmental stage of your life with not owning a home yet. So, and I'm sure, there are different variables. I know, Olivia, well, my child, all this, I know there could be different variables in there. I get it. But the purchase of a home is not something that I would want my daughter focused on right now. I want her to enjoy life. I want her to experience financial well-being as it is in this moment, and not having to worry about buying a home and then buying all the things that need to go into a home and then feeling like you need to go into debt to get those things that you want to fill your home. And then on top of that, if you don't have enough emergency savings to cover your HVAC going out or anything else, then I wouldn't want that added stress on Gen Z right now. So that's just breaking my heart a little bit. But that's what financial education can do for Gen Z, for our kids. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox there. 47% of 3 generations are saying another thing that keeps them up at night is making enough income to live the lifestyle they've always dreamed of. So this is different from Gen Z. They got 47% for all these 3 generations except Gen Z. Gen Z is 60%, the other 3 are 47%. And 55% of Gen Z, they're only 1 point off from the other 3 generations in worrying about if they have enough money saved for retirement. And I would imagine that a huge portion of that, and one of the reasons maybe they're so alike in that avenue, is because someone like me, I am telling my 16-year-old, hey, let's start getting this education now. Retirement and paying into your retirement is going to be very important. Let's start that process with you understanding what that looks like, what it means. And that's one of the reasons, as I shared in the previous episode, I pulled her into the conversation that she overheard my husband and I having regarding our net worth. So this is what a beautiful retirement can look like and can feel like, especially if you start young, that you don't have to invest a lot. You're putting in a little bit every time, starting from a very young age, so that you don't have to catch up later, so that you do have more money in your account to live the lifestyle that you've always dreamed of. So those are conversations you can have with your child and build that financial intimacy there. And then here's the last one that I'll mention before we close this episode. 42% of the 3 generations say they worry about building up enough emergency savings, whereas 54% of Gen Z are feeling financially, or they actually, what concerns them is feeling financially secure enough to have and support children. I love that they're thinking about that, because it is expensive to have children. And there are a lot of decisions, financial decisions, that need to be made revolving around children that don't necessarily have anything to do with income. So it could be lifestyle, right? They're already worried about making enough income to live the lifestyle they've always dreamed of. Maybe one person within that couple dynamic wanted to stay home with the kids and wanted to make sure that the person who is bringing home the income, they would have enough money to continue that lifestyle, even if they did choose to have kids. So these are all great discussion points to shoot from. So I'm so glad that you joined me today, and I hope you listened to the first part of this episode and that you listen to part 3 coming up, because there's more on fidelity, but there's also more from this therapist's perspective when it comes to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and what can make or break your relationship. I'll be sharing the Gottman's style of couples therapy when it comes to that, and what criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling can do in your marriage. So I look forward to you joining next time. Remember to rate and review the pod wherever you listen.